Welcome back to my adventures, where every adventure is unique. We're going to continue with my Tour du Mont Blanc, my experience, risk versus reward. This is part 4. Weather the weather, whatever the weather. As I mentioned earlier in the intro, part 1, weather will be the biggest factor that's going to determine your experience. There's going to be many other factors involved, but the one you have the least control over is going to have the biggest impact on your experience. And just run through a few things. On sunny days, everyone thinks blue skies, sunny days, everything is great. The problem with elevation and sun is that the UV levels increase by 10% for every 1,000 meters in elevation that you go. And at, say, 2756 meters, this means that the sun UV levels compared to sea level city is 27, almost 28% higher than at sea level. And the result of this is sunburn cases are going to increase. I would say most people that I saw on the tour were hiking in t-shirts and shorts. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, there was a guy from Michigan who was in shorts, and his legs, I saw him later in the day, his legs were as red as this here. His legs were this shade of red, and if he wasn't in pain at that moment, I'm sure at night or the next morning he certainly would have been. And it's just not it used to be sunburns were they were painful at start, and then slowly you got over it, and then a week or two later the pain was gone and you were back to normal. But as we know now, there's a high correlation between sunburns and skin cancer, and you really need to be cognizant of this. And it seems like very few people on the tour are cognizant of the skin damage that can occur when you are at elevation. I think a lot of them, they just think it's the same as when they're in the city. So take this at heart, and the way you can avoid this UV level increase effect is a few things. My choice is to wear white long sleeve shirts, cotton shirts, slightly oversized, and pants, loose flexible pants, as well as a wide brim sun hat and UV sunglasses. So that was my sun protection regime. Like I say, I saw most people in short sleeve shirts and shorts and baseball caps, and yeah, I think most people had sunglasses, but I wouldn't say all of them did. There was probably a good 20-30% who didn't have sunglasses either. I wore my sunglasses almost exclusively, unless obviously if it was overcast and you didn't have much sun impact. I didn't wear my sunglasses, although I think someone can probably argue that even when the sun is not visible, it's still, the UV level is still getting through. So there may be an argument to make that you should possibly wear your sunglasses at elevation, regardless of obviously if it's raining you wouldn't, but if it's overcast and sunny is two reasons you'd wear it. Another good thing for sunglasses, not just sun protection, but also wind. It can be quite windy at certain sections on the tour, and then you're getting a lot of dust blown into your eyes, which can make them quite itchy and sore and dry. So it could also help just with keeping your eyes a bit protected from high wind. So the other option to do if you don't want to wear this sort of regime is to start lathering yourself up with sunscreen. I did have a very small tube of sunscreen with me for my hands and a couple parts, because my white shirt was oversized. I had to put a bit of sunscreen on parts of my neck that were exposed that my hat didn't cover, or depending on which way the sun was, or I was walking, or which way the sun was in relationship to me. And then I also got some lip balm in Courmayeur. The reason being, my lips were starting to get dry simply because of the sun and then the wind, and I didn't have sun on my mouth per se, but still my lips were getting quite dry. So I got some sunscreen lip balm, and that seemed to improve that situation. I don't usually use lip balm, but I did in this case, and it seemed to work quite well. So I didn't get any sunburns at all while I was hiking, and so I've used this in the past in different other adventures. So I kind of, this is my trusted approach to sunny days. So I've had good experience with getting bad sunburns and then learning and getting protected to make sure it doesn't happen again. So this one worked really well. Obviously, I think you're supposed to, if you put sunscreen on your skin, you're supposed to reapply it every 4 hours as well. So you're going to have to carry a fairly large jug of sunscreen around with you, which is also quite expensive in the stores. It seems to be an item that gets cost increased quite a bit, and no matter where you're trying to buy it. And obviously the smaller the villages, the higher the costs. And you have to go through it quite a bit. You have to keep applying it, not forgetting to apply it. And to be honest with you, my personal belief is that sunscreen basically may protect your skin from getting sunburned, but I'm not convinced that it doesn't stop the damage happening to your skin. And it's kind of like it's a bit of a fake protection. So let's say you don't have sunscreen on and you have exposed skin, and then after 2 hours, let's say even an hour, you get a bad sunburn, so you cover your skin up or you get out of the sun. Now, let's say you put lots of sunscreen on and you spend 10 hours out in the sun, and next day you don't have a sunburn. You think, wow, I didn't get affected by the sun at all. I don't know. I don't buy that argument. I think sunscreen is just hiding the damage that could still be going on. I don't think, we have to be a bit careful on what we think we know about the human body and the reaction of sun and this sunscreen, of how effective it actually is. And, I'm sure it's okay to have it on for an hour and maybe protect from a sunburn, but exposing your skin to excessive amounts of radiation, UV light, and, relying on this to protect you, quote unquote, I'm not convinced. I personally am not convinced. And the other thing is, you're absorbing a lot of this into your skin. Who knows what chemicals are there, and you're literally bathing in this stuff. I'm just not a fan of it. I don't go the chemical route. I much prefer to have a non-chemical solution. I mean, I wasn't hot with my long sleeve shirts and pants. I never felt uncomfortable. It was nice and loose and cotton, and these were nice and loose and flexible. And I never felt like, oh my God, I got to take my pants and shirt off because it's just, way too hot. I need to get in some shorts and t-shirt. I never once had that in my mind. Now, maybe if you're hiking in July and August, maybe in long sleeve shirts and pants, it may really be uncomfortable. But in September, I didn't have a problem at all, and I strongly recommend that. The other thing is, like I say, everyone was wearing baseball hats. That doesn't really protect your face very well. When you've got like 360 sun, a blue sky, clear day, you got to remember in the French Alps, you don't have just direct sunlight from the sun. You got snow-capped mountains all over the place, which are like a prism. Almost like a magnifying prism, and they just reflect all those rays everywhere, and everywhere meaning you. So you don't just have the direct sun coming from the sun itself. It's also the reflected or refracted sun from on the snow that's on the mountain peaks. It's obviously not on your feet, but I mean it's still around, and it's still reflecting that light and directing it towards you. So. I would definitely go with the baseball cap. I don't think it gives it's some protection, but it certainly I don't think is enough. And I know it all looks fashionable, and you look super cool, but if you want to be a skin cancer case or have a really bad sunburn or have some chemical, in 10 years the government comes out and says, oh, actually all that sunscreen causes who knows what disease or what the effects of this are long term, because this stuff is quite new, right? It's just on the market. There's lots of government products that have so-called been approved by the FDA or whatever regulatory body, and then 10, 20 years later, when the longer term effects kick in, they say, oh, actually, it wasn't that good after all. We shouldn't have used it. And, everybody just bathes in this stuff these days. So everyone's like, do what you feel comfortable with. Just be aware of the risks, which is what this video is about. Not just the rewards of looking fashionable on the trail, but also the risks involved with that fashionable statement. Now, in terms of me hiking, I basically came up with a motto while I was hiking. I didn't have this before I got there, but it's basically, if there's no rain, just keep hiking. This is another good thing about having a tent. When you're not relying on having to stop, at noon because you've reached your refugio or your refuge, and you can't go any further. When you have a tent, you basically can hike as much as you want. If it's overcast or it's sunny, I hiked as hard and as long as I could. There's lots of benefits to doing that. You get to see everything, which you don't usually get when it's raining. You don't see a lot of anything. The weather is good. You're probably going to feel like hiking, so you don't want to be held back, and just keep hiking. All my big hike days were on good weather for the most part, unless a couple times I had no choice. But in general, if there's no rain, it's overcast, or it's sunny or partially sunny, I'd wake up at 5, be packed and ready to go at 6, and then I would hike till sometimes 6 at night, 7, 8, 9 at night or longer. As long as the sun was out, and then sometimes even beyond that. That was my motto: no rain, just hike, and just keep hiking as much as you can. And as much as obviously, if you're tired and you're feeling sore, then obviously you stop. But in general, if you're feeling good, just keep hiking without limit. Other than it's getting late and you have to stop. But in general, even sometimes that doesn't stop you. On rainy days, there's two things that you'll see for sale. There's a rain jacket and there's a rain coat. Most of what you'll get in the lower class products is rain coats, and they're probably good for about an hour of light rain. What happens is they slowly absorb the water into the material, and then it's no longer rainproof or waterproof. It's going to start to seep in. Even in small spots, it'll start to seep in and increase, and then suddenly your shirt's going to be wet. They also tend to have very bad ventilation. So even if you're not getting wet from the rain, it's trapped all your body heat inside. And obviously, if you're hiking, you're going to be generating a lot of body heat. And then suddenly you're sweating inside like you're in a green garbage bag and doing a workout. So you're getting absolutely drenched inside on a rainy day with your quote-unquote raincoat. So you have to be really careful on the lower tier budget of these products, that you look for a proper rain jacket instead of a raincoat. The one I got was a Rab one, and it's impermeable to water for the most part. I mean, obviously, it's every material is going to have some limit, but I walked in that for about 4 hours in a fairly heavy rain, and I was completely dry. I didn't really like it, to be honest with you, because it's a little bit stiff and it's a little bit challenging to bring it in the knapsack. But I rammed it in with my tent in the lower compartment. And that one day I had to wear it. It performed really well, and I'm glad I had it. And like a rain jacket will and should keep you dry for a good 8 hours. It's also got a really good ventilation system under the underarms, where you can have two big zippers that you can undo, so it keeps you cool, so you don't overheat. And it's got tight wristbands, so you can loosen them off and let ventilate through the arms. And then the hood has a system where you can adjust it to have it sit tight against your head without constricting it, your view. There's some strings you can pull that have latches on them, and so it's a well thought out jacket, and it's long. It goes past your your belt buckle. It goes deeper, so it covers up sort of the upper part of your leg. And it's got some nice pockets. It was quite expensive, to to be honest, much more than, say, your raincoats would be. But I think on that day in particular, it definitely paid for itself. And like I say, they're purpose-built. If you do get wet, and it's usually always cooler on those days, you could be hungry. There could be strong winds. It's quite easy to, especially if you're at altitude, to start to get a cold, wind-wet condition, which will lead to, or could lead to, hypothermia. Again, depending on the season, but if you're in this situation, cold, wet, and windy for 6-8 hours, you could be considered possibly getting into a hypothermic zone. Something you want to avoid, obviously. The other thing is when it's rainy, everything gets wet, soaked, puddly, muddy trails, which becomes slippery. All the rocks are wet. You're going to have, often you have exposed tree roots, which are bad when it's dry and really bad when it's wet, because your foot literally skates on them. And all of these factors are kind of adding up to a really unpleasant day. And so what I always try to suggest is, when it's no rain, you hike. When it's a rain day, strongly consider whether you want to take a rest day, if you can afford it. I'm talking about terms of your schedule, and then obviously you have to have some place to stay. The refuge is not going to simply say, oh, it's raining, you can stay an extra day. There's going to be no rooms available, and there's new hikers coming in, and you got to go to the next refuge, or you're going to lose your pay for that night. So you really are forced at this stage, and that's one reason I don't like the refuge method, is you're going to be literally forced out into the rain to get to the next refuge. So you're kind of like, I don't like that sort of scenario. Whereas if you're in a tent, you could say, well, I don't want to sit in a tent all day in the rain, or I can't do that because there's the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. sunset to sunrise rule, where you can't just stay in your tent all day out in the open. But if you're in a campsite, the nice thing about being a campsite, it might cost you €6 or €8 for a night, and you simply say, I want to stay another night, to the guy at the cash, and he says, fine, no problem. You pay your €6 to €8, and you've got yourself a rain day, a rest day, rain day. So I did that actually in Champex Lac. I was confronted in the morning with some really strong storm clouds moving in, and they were going in the same direction as the hike. And everyone else in the campsite, there was probably 30 hikers. They all 29 of them packed up and were on the road like around 6 a.m. I was up at 6 a.m. too, because I was still undecided what I was going to do. And then I saw those storm clouds rolling in, and I knew they were going to get absolutely hit with lightning, thunder, and heavy rain. And they all went, because they had no choice. They had to make the next refuge. And unfortunately, all of them got hit really hard with a really bad storm. I just stayed in my tent, paid up for another night, which was about €8. Maybe I think that one was actually a little bit more. That one was €14 because it was in Champex Lac. But I gladly paid for the €14. I needed to have a good day for the hike that was following, because you couldn't do it in bad weather. It simply was too risky and dangerous. So I was also sort of considering that in the decision. So those two factors, I took a rest day. It was a rain day for sure, and I basically avoided it and had a really nice day, extra day in Champex Lac. Not everyone can do that, but if you do, again, try to get yourself more than a 7-day schedule to do the tour, and then you will have that option to thing. And the only way you can do that, the only way you can check that box off is if you have a tent. It doesn't really work with hotels. I guess it works with hotels if you're wealthy and you can afford to simply stay another night in the hotel. Yeah, that works. If you're on a budget, the refuge method doesn't work. You're locked into that schedule itinerary. You have to be at the other refuge. They won't let you stay at the same one. So having that tent is that luxury, pays off. You can actually be flexible with the weather. So one of the things you have to also be aware of is mountain mist. I've seen it from a distance and admired it, and I've never really hiked in it until my Tour du Mont Blanc, and this was actually on the last stage. So I'll maybe just give a brief overview of what happened and what my experience was like. I was hiking up, ascending. I was solo hiking at that time, and there was really few people on the trail that day, or at least that section. And the weather had started. It was sort of overcast and drizzly at different times during the day. There wasn't really too much mist rolling around, but at this time of the day, it was around 4 o'clock. As I was looking down in the valley, you could see this rapid avalanche of mist rising up quite quickly, and it was really quite dense. I wasn't really too concerned about it at the first because I hadn't really encountered any mist during my hike, so I didn't really pay too much attention to it. And then I got to a section on the trail where I was following the trail. You could clearly see there was travel marks on the ground where people were walking, and it went to kind of like a ledge it had like a bit of a slope to it. So the wide path suddenly stopped and became like a sloped part of a gradient, if you like, with no real discernible path through it. And what I saw ahead, which was about 10 meters ahead, was sort of looked like the continuation. The path started up again. The wide path started up again and continued. I couldn't really make it out that well over that distance, but that's kind of what I saw. It seemed to be that the path was picked up again. And often what you'll get on the trail of the Tour du Mont Blanc is what I call like trail problems or geometry problems or problem solving. So the trail will be kind of uniform, sort of your standard trail geography, and then suddenly something will happen on the trail and you have to overcome it, whether it's a steep drop in sections or some large boulders or some sections with chains on them with a steep drop. There's steps. Sometimes there's overpasses of small rivers, and not rivers, but like streams. There's usually these what I call problems on the trail to solve, and in this case, I thought this was just another problem. For whatever reason, the trail couldn't cut into this part. Maybe there had been a rock slide or something, and it wiped out that part of the trail. So now you had to overcome it by sort of going on this gradient, which I called the ledge. It wasn't a ledge, but a true ledge, but I called it a ledge. The ledge problem, that's what I called it. So while I was contemplating how to get past this ledge, and then to make sure that the trail was ahead of me, I looked down again on the ground leading up to this point, and I said, yeah, that's definitely the trail. I haven't lost the trail. You can clearly see people's markers up to here, and then it suddenly disappears. Which happens sometimes in rockier terrain. You'll lose the mud markings, especially when it's slant like this. It's slanted. So I looked and I was trying to figure out which route people had been taking, because you're looking for markers, and there seemed to be a bit more of a definition on what I call a lower route. There's two routes. There's like a lower and a high route over this problem, this ledge problem, and I thought, well, the lower one looks a little bit more distinct, so maybe I'll try the lower one. And as I was sort of getting out there, this mist started rolling in, and this was really the first time I'd been hiking in mist, and it rolled in really fast. I was really surprised because I got about halfway out on this ledge, so about maybe 5 meters into it, and the mist basically completely enshrouded me. To the point that I had about a meter of visibility all around me, and unfortunately, it just happened to coincide with trying to solve this problem and not really knowing how to solve it, and then suddenly being completely enveloped in mountain mist. And this was on like a bit of a gradient, so there wasn't a lot to hang on to. Like if you're on the trail, it's wide. Maybe it's up to a meter wide, and it's really hard to fall off of it unless you trip and slip. But on this, it was not it looked like almost looked like there was a mudslide there or something that had washed away part of the trail. Let's put it that way. So now basically you still had to overcome it. Maybe there was a rock fall there or a water slide, like something washed away part of that trail. And so now you had to deal with it. So I got about halfway out there, and I was completely engulfed in this really dense mountain mist for the first time hiking on the tour. And I thought, wow, this is really, I can't really see what's ahead of me anymore. And I was getting a bit concerned because the trail itself, or the low route that I was taking, it seemed to be getting less and less discernible. Like, at the start, there seemed to be some markings where people had tried, but those sort of started to disappear, and then where I was, they sort of kind of vanished, and so it was almost just like a flat gradient of a face. There was really no more sort of the steps, if you like, had sort of vanished. So I was getting a bit concerned that maybe I shouldn't have taken this route. Maybe I just picked the wrong route. And because it was so much mist, I couldn't really see any further ahead of me. And I thought, well, I'm only about halfway. It seemed like I was only about halfway there. So I thought, because I thought it was about 10 meters and I was about halfway, so 5 meters. So I thought I better just go back, because I didn't have enough confidence to go forward. So I slowly worked my way back to this trail, and where the trail edge sort of vanished. And I walked about 5-10 steps back, and I kept walking up to the edge again, because I was looking at the trail, and I'm saying, is this really where the trail is going? I wanted to make sure, because I didn't want to get caught out in this ledge and find out I was actually off course. And I kept walking over it, and I'm like, yeah, it's definitely here. There's nowhere else. It didn't seem to be going anywhere else. It just sort of went to this edge and then just vanished. And so I went back to it, and I thought, well, that was the low route. There is kind of a high route. It doesn't look as good as the low route did, but I thought maybe once you get out there, it starts to sort of becomes clear, and you just carry on. Still the mountain mist was there, so I couldn't look past to see if it was really the trail on the other side. And I really had a hard time to make out whether the high route was, any better than the low route. So again, you've got your heavy backpack on too, and you're kind of like, in this case, you're not walking, you're sort of crouching, and sort of you're leaning into the mountain to stop from falling off it, and you're sort of hands and knees, and sort of I was on the side, sitting on my side and my legs, and then just sort of walking your way across it. And again, I got about halfway on the high route. And the same thing happened. Anything that was around that sort of looked like people had gone through here, any sort of clues or markings suddenly vanished again. And this was, again, about 5 meters in. And, I couldn't see any further past that to make out whether this, was getting any better. It seemed to just, again, vanish. So at this point, I thought I better just stop and take a deep breath. Don't panic. Just stay where you are. Think about it. Give yourself a chance to think about it, assess the situation, and then make a decision. And I probably sat there for about three minutes, just resting and trying to clear my head and not getting overwhelmed by not being able to see anything, because the mountain mist was all over. I didn't really know, I really couldn't even, maybe a good thing is I couldn't really see, the gradient and the drop off after that. So maybe that was a good thing too. I couldn't see exactly what happened. If I had slipped, I wouldn't have been able to see where I was going. Maybe that was a good thing too. But so the decision after about 3 minutes was not to continue again. And I thought the safest thing to do, the smartest thing to do, is just to backtrack, which wasn't, it wasn't so easy to backtrack, because you sort of commit on the route, and now you have to go backwards. It's harder going backwards than it is forward, but I just took my time. I stayed calm. I didn't panic, and I just slowly backed myself out of that situation, back to the edge of the trail again. And quite frankly, I was glad to be off the ledge. And I was sitting there, and I was just like, it's not the low route, it's not the high route. I'm looking around. The trail definitely comes up here, and suddenly it just vanishes. I said, this doesn't make sense. And within about 3 or 4 minutes after that, I heard someone, like some rocks trickling. And so I knew someone was on the trail, which was quite rare, because I hadn't seen anyone for probably an hour by then. And sure enough, there was a guy coming down the trail, not because I was going up, he was descending, I was ascending, and he was coming towards me. And it was a trail runner who was doing training late at night, and obviously, it was around, I think, what was it, 4:30 at night, but it was, quite heavy mist, and you wouldn't expect, but those guys, they train all the time because they have to in all conditions. And so I said to him, I apologize. Can you just give me a, I said, the trail seems to go this way, but it just disappears. And he goes, no, he's going, that's not the way it goes. And he says, it's a switchback. And so literally the trail went to that edge and then literally did a complete 180 and went up this rock, sort of like a rock rise, which is where he came down. And I'm like, you can't be serious. He's going, yeah. He's going, if you're going to Layouche, you got to go this way. And I said, yeah, well, that's how I'm going. He's going, yeah, you got to follow it. It's a switchback. And so he carried on. And thankfully he came because, I'm not sure I would have noticed that as a switchback, because it was one of those situations where it's, you can discern the trail and then suddenly it turns into a rock field, or it wasn't really a rock field in this case. It was more like just relatively larger boulders, small boulders, but walking over them, you're not going to make any markings on it for other people to sort of follow the trail. And that's exactly what happened in this case. It was a switchback that went straight up, and then you pick up the trail again. But, if you're walking into it, you wouldn't look behind you because you wouldn't expect there to be anything. And like I say, the trail, you thought, well, I'll just keep walking through. And it suddenly stops, does a switchback, and goes straight up. So that was a lot of things that happened. And in a short period of time, that could have been, had I fallen there, it probably wouldn't have been a good result. I don't know what the outcome of that would have been, but I wouldn't have wanted to find out. And it's just a question of the mist coming in at the same time I lost the trail, and then actually having the trail do this unusual switchback into a rock field that was really hard to pick up, because even if it had been a switchback with some mud, like a dirt trail, I would have been able to pick it up because I kept looking around and I couldn't see anything. So that was just a situation where circumstances sort of multiplied and created a bit more of a dangerous situation than I would have liked to have been in. But these things happen, and you just have to not panic, stay calm. And again, usually in these cases, when you find, you use your gut, your instinct. Sometimes that's the best marker. It's like if something doesn't feel right, don't push it, especially when you're out, in these conditions. You're best to go back, retrace your steps, and then stop and reassess the situation instead of, just saying, well, I got this far, I might as well just keep going. Had I gone further on that ledge, I would have been off the trail, and who knows where I would have ended up. So in some ways, it was actually good that the trail just disappeared on that ledge, because had I made it through it, I would have been off the trail. And like I say, you can wander for a good distance and get lost up there quite easily, especially in a strong mist. Or worse, I could have gotten the other side and not found the trail at all, and then had to turn around and come back across the ledge. Not only having to cross it once, cross it twice. So you're doubling your risk, which was already high. So that's just a situation you can find yourself sometimes. And you could say, well, you should never hike alone. Well, to be honest with you, if you have two people, sometimes it doesn't necessarily help. Both people would be on the ledge, and the chance of someone falling is twice as high. And then if neither person really knows where they're going in that situation with a heavy mist, it's sometimes it's not as good to have two people, because at least in this situation, I sensed I was getting off course, or something was wrong, and I kind of let my instinct take over and simply listened to that and backed out. You could have someone else with you who says, no, it's this way, just keep going, and now suddenly you're getting drawn into that situation where your instinct is saying don't go, and they're telling you to carry forward, because either they don't know or they're just feeling brave, or bravery and stupidity are usually there's a thin line between them. So in this case, sometimes solo hiking has its benefits and sometimes it doesn't, but maybe in this case it may have created a bit of a situation, but it also possibly prevented a situation from occurring. The other one is night hiking. You're going to get into situations where all these risks that I've been talking about in the day get amplified, simply because you have limited trail visibility. If you think it's bad trailing, hiking in the mountain mist, which tends to often go away. It might be in it might be there all day, but often it's usually accompanied with strong winds, or relatively, winds that move. So, it might come in for half an hour, and then suddenly clear up. Or you could cross over to a different side of the mountain face, and suddenly, that side doesn't have any mist. So there's lots of variables there, but when it's night, it's night. It's not going anywhere for the next, 8, 10, 12 hours, 8 hours, I guess. So you've got limited trail visibility all the time, no matter where you are. Nothing you can do about it. The markers are much easier to miss even than it is with a mist, because all you can see with a headlamp on, at least the one I had. I did do some night hiking. The only thing you can see with a night light like the one I had, which is not a bad light, it's just not maybe meant for night hiking. It was more meant for just campsite stuff, but not really night hiking. It wasn't really purpose built, I think, for that. And you don't see much. If it's less than 1 meter visibility with a mountain mist, it's probably something less than that. Again, with a headlamp. So you're getting all these factors on top of all these other factors. So you're just multiplying your risk level exponentially. You also get insect activity increasing. I was fine when I was actually hiking, but if I ever stopped even for a brief second, I had moss. Obviously, you've got a light on your head, your forehead, and whenever you stop, there was these white moss that would just kind of swarm you. So you basically you didn't want to stop for any second, because you would literally have all these moss flying into your face, going for the light. So that was a bit of a problem. There was no moon out that night that I hiked at night. And I'll get into this later. I discussed the mountain mist now, but I'll get into the night hike later. Why I was night hiking. I think, again, a lot of the people who were on a fixed schedule had no choice but to hike at night. I know when I was I was with 2 other hikers, and we decided to pitch our tent at the Grand Col Ferret. Myself and the other hiker did, but the third hiker had to be at a refuge, and he had about another 10 to 15 kilometers to hike at night. And it was already about 8:30 at 9 o'clock at night, so the sun was going down, and he still had another 10 to 15 kilometers to hike. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending, obviously I don't know what happened to him, but he ended up hiking probably for another 3 to 4 hours, maybe. I don't know how long, but he definitely had to hike at night because the sun was almost down when we stopped. And the only thing he could do was night hike, because he had to be at the refuge. And he had to make his schedule. So, it's quite dangerous, again, when you go the refugio way. You could be forced into either hiking in the rain or a thunderstorm, or at night, simply because you have to get to that refuge, because you're going to lose your night. And then if you don't get there, you have no place to sleep because you don't have a tent. And then worst off, you have to not only get to that place the next day, you have to get to the place after it the next day, because you're going to lose that one. And if you keep losing them, you lose all of them. So it's like a domino effect. So he was forced to hike at night by himself. No one else went with him. He was by himself, and he was gone down the trail as the sun set. What else? In these situations, it's easier to get lost or injured. And the other problem is that if you do get lost or injured, you can scream your head off. No one's hiking at night. Very few people are hiking at night, obviously. And, there's no other hikers on the trail who are going to, jump to your aid if they happen to be around. That can happen even during the day, but your chances are dwindling quickly if you get injured or lost. If you're lost, you can't find your way back. And then when the sun rises, kind of like the mountain mist thing, you get lost in the mountain mist, and when it clears, you don't know where you are. Like, you're completely 360. You can't go back because you don't know where you came from. And it's the same thing at night. If you wander off the trail at night and you try and find your way back in the morning, you have no clue where the trail is because you don't know how you got there. And then again, if you get injured, there's nobody going to run out, coming out to get you. Then, there's few people who do stealth camping. Most of them are in the campsites or refuges. So if you're between refuges and no campsites, I'm not saying you'll never find someone hiking. I mean, I was hiking at night, and he was hiking at night. But in general, if you're relying on hikers at night to pick you up or help you, you're in bad shape. Thunderstorms. I'm going to have more to say on this shortly, but I think the way the massif is, it's kind of like this raised mountain central platform, and then there's kind of like a ringed valley, and then there's another set of mountains that are on the outside of that. And when the thunder comes in, it seems to echo in that valley and just literally like amplifies it, and it's actually quite terrifying. It sounds so much more intense than any storms you've been in the cities. It just has this really deep sort of terrifying echo effect all through the mountain range when these storms roll in, and they're intense to begin with, and then, like I say, you get this sound echo cavern thing going, and you literally think the sky's falling on you. You can get hail and snow even in the summer. July, August, September, you can still get hail and snow, especially in the high passes. I did talk to some hikers, and they had experienced some hail. I didn't see any, but they did get hailed on. One thing I would do for sure next time, and I would strongly recommend everyone else going for the first time, or is take a weather app with you on your cell phone. There's lots of them out there. There's Windy, there's Mountain Forecast, there's Chamonix, Meteo, Meteo OCL, Meteo France 4+ app, Meteo Swiss. There's I'm sure there's more of them. As you can see, some of them are region specific. So depending on where you are, you want to look at that app for that location. This is obviously the Chamonix region. This one here is obviously in Switzerland, and some of these other ones I'm not sure because I didn't have them loaded, which was a real mistake on my part, not knowing that they existed. Though, to be honest, I know there's weather apps like AccuWeather and stuff like that, but I didn't know they had specific apps for the mountain region. Mountains are really difficult for weather because obviously weather's coming in and hitting the mountains and doing unusual, unpredictable things on how it responds, and you could have several systems hitting those mountains all over the place. So it's just, in terms of prediction, it's really, really difficult. And then if you're hiking over that course, every time you move your location and your position and your time in relationship to the weather systems that are coming through, it's just constantly changing. You can't even, to predict it and say this will happen and this will happen. It's almost impossible unless you have a very large dominant system that's coming through, and let's say it's going to be sunny for the next 2 days, and it's, this does happen. I had a day of complete sunshine. Actually, I had 2 days of complete sunshine, 24/7 sunshine. So it does happen, but you can also get 24/7 rain. I didn't see that, and then, like I say before, you can get these cycles where you're getting everything. You're getting sun, cloudy, drizzly, rain, thunderstorms, back to sun, all in the same day in a cycle. It just keeps kind of rotating day after day. So I would not do the tour again. This is again. I'm trying to emphasize, I would not do the tour again without a weather app, and knowing how to use it, and and what locations it's valid for, and then having those weather maps. I would probably be consulting it like at least every 2 hours, updates depending on where you are and where you're going. I would constantly be knowing what the weather is doing, what you're coming up against, especially when it's unsettled. Knowing what the weather is absolutely vital. Again, that's the biggest factor that's going to have impact your experience. And so you really need to know what the weather is. And often I had some idea what the weather was just by talking to people, but it would be like, someone the other day told me it was going to be sunny, or someone told me, the next 2 days are going to be rainy. It's not. You're making decisions based on that, which is what I had to do, unfortunately, and it is really dangerous to do that because it's not good enough. But that's all I had. this time. So I would not do the tour again without weather apps, knowing how they operate, knowing where they are applicable, and then consulting them all the time. You could still talk to locals. I mean, don't rely on these 100%, but often the locals know the weather systems going through better than you, because they've lived there all the time and they can read the mountains better. And then obviously other hikers on the trail, you can consult with them if you don't have access to one of these apps, which is what I did at mostly before I this is the way to go. This is definitely, I wouldn't go without it next time. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. The weather, like I say, is constantly changing by the hour, the altitude, the location. Daily forecasts from a city is not going to be much help. Like, if someone tells you in Chamonix it's sunny and dry for the next 3 days, I mean, and you're hiking through the tour, that has little to no relevance to you. It's literally nothing you can hang your hat on. So don't get caught into that sort of thing. Well, it said it was going to be sunny and warm in Chamonix. Well, you're not in Chamonix. So taking the weather from the cities and the towns is not always of much use. So using like your AccuWeather forecast is not going to do it. You've got to get these mountain. These are specifically for mountain forecasting. Like I say, these are not of much value or accuracy for doing Tour du Mont Blanc hiking. In general, like no rain, hike. Rain or thunderstorms, do not hike, especially thunderstorms. Your best bet is not to hike in a thunderstorm. There are increased risks. People have been killed hiking in thunderstorms. It is quite a terrifying situation, much more than, when you were a child, you're probably afraid of thunderstorms, but you're going to go back to that situation, I think, when you get in the Alpine mountains. The problem is that the storms usually are low hanging, like because they're low altitude systems coming through and they hit the mountains, and it's literally very intense. Sometimes they get funneled, where they're getting compressed into a smaller region, so they become very volatile, or they're getting split, or they're hitting the mountain face and getting sort of undergoing a lot of turbulence. Which just makes them much more intense, and it really is quite scary. And I don't usually get scared of thunderstorms at all. I actually kind of like them because I think they're kind of cool. But in this situation, it is a bit terrifying to get caught in a really heavy thunderstorm, and they're really intense. I wasn't prepared for this. I've seen some really big thunderstorms, but this stuff was really intense. So in general, if you are caught in a thunderstorm, we'll talk about that shortly. But in general, if it's raining, or where it's going to rain, or definitely if there's thunderstorms, do not hike. Rest day or rest half day. Let the storm system work its way through. Find yourself some shelter and a refuge. Not necessarily your tent, or stay in the city. The town. If you're passing through a small village, just stay there. And we follow that up. Lightning in the mountains, facts and realities. And I didn't know. When I prepared this, I started looking into mountains and lightning in the mountains to sort of get some idea what to do and what not to do, because having not done it, and I wasn't really prepared. I'm one of those people who wasn't prepared for hiking the tour. I didn't have enough information, so I've done this as much to teach myself as spread the information. But you can get direct strikes. There's 3 different types in general. They classify 3 different types of lightning strikes. There's a direct strike where the lightning hits you and travels to earth through you, because lightning's trying to go to ground. And then there's side flashes where the lightning hits a nearby object, let's say a tree, and then jumps sideways out of the tree and hits you because you're near the tree. And then there's a ground strike. So the lightning hits the ground and it actually travels through the ground or over the ground. And because you're standing on the ground, it's going to hit you en route. So let's say it hits you're standing on a rock face where there's you're surrounded by a smoothly polished rock, and it's raining and the rock is wet, and the lightning hits that rock. The lightning can't get to ground when it hits the rock, so it travels all over the surface of the rock through the water, which conducts it, and because you're standing on it, you become literally a target for that lightning, and it will pass through you and hit you as it keeps continuing trying to get to ground. So you're literally caught in the path of the lightning. So if you were to ask yourself which one of these is the most, which one happens the most often, most people would think the direct strike. That's actually the rarest. That's about 5% of the lightning strikes are direct strike. I think they said like 35% were side flash, so maybe 35 to 40%, and then the other 50, 55, 60% are ground strikes. So if you're going to get struck by lightning, it's probably a ground strike and then a side flash, but less likely a direct strike. And this is the one that people most think they're going to get hit by. Most people are probably not aware of these two. That's why they tell you not to stand under tall trees in a thunderstorm. It's not because you're going to get, the tree's going to fall on you. It's basically the lightning is going to go through the tree, and because you're near it, it's literally going to jump out of the tree and hit you and then go to ground as it's going to ground through the tree. And then if you're on wet ground, it's just literally you standing on the ground and the lightning going over the ground or through the ground and then basically hitting you because you're standing on it. So these are the things you have to watch out for, and you'll see now why it's much more dangerous than you anticipate. People say, "Oh, how can it possibly ever strike me?" It's like a 1 in a million thing. Well, it's actually not as infrequent. There's these two that are much more serious, and you have less control over. So it's literally where you're standing and what you're standing near is it more important than just you being there. Like sun UV, lightning strikes are amplified at high altitude simply because you're closer to the storm by 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 meters. So the closer you are to the storm, the more likely you're going to be near the lightning and the electric charges that are building in the air. So your proximity to the storm is closer, just like your proximity to the sun is closer. So you have a higher risk of getting struck by lightning. There's a thing called St. Elmo's fire. It's not a song, although it is a song. It was a movie. But I'm talking about the St. Elmo's fire of electricity. Is you get electrical charge buildup. Let's say if you're standing on a mountain ridge and you are the tallest object, just prior to a lightning strike, there will be an actual electrical charge buildup around you. And you'll start to actually feel tingling sensations in your skin, and your hair may start to stand up. And then if that continues, and that's basically electrical charge building up on you, and now the electricity basically has established a path that will follow into ground. So it literally it's using you as a lightning rod. You're becoming a human lightning rod. So if you're ever witnessing or feeling like a tingling sensation, you're probably you're getting prepared to be a lightning strike. So it's a situation where you have to get away from that region as fast as you can, because you're literally in a region where you're getting built up with electrical charges around you. They used to have on the old sailing ships, they would have St. Elmo's fire on the masts, and it's like little blue. It looks like lightning, but it's not. It's just a buildup of charges. So it's not like it doesn't have the electrical killing power of lightning. It just literally, you might start to get like glow blue near you or around you, or objects near you may also be experiencing this, which means they're about to be struck, which means a side flash could be hitting you. So the tree that you're with could start to exhibit some St. Elmo's fire, which means it's getting prepared for a lightning strike, and that lightning strike could jump onto you and kill you, or certainly injure you badly. So that's something to be aware of. And for that reason, do not be the tallest thing or stand near the tallest thing on the mountain. So if you're on a ridge or a summit or a col, you will be the tallest object in relationship to the storm, and so you are now going to be electrical buildup charge, and you will be the lightning rod that the lightning is going to try to pass through to get to ground. Like it says here, there's the numbers there. So direct strike injury is about 5%, ground strike injury is about 50%. So that leaves about 40-45%. And obviously these numbers are relative, but in general, this is the least, and these two are the most, and this one is the worst. Shelter under trees of similar height is actually not too bad. It's when it's a tall isolated tree, again because of the side flash. The tall isolated tree is going to be the lightning rod as it travels through it and you're near it. It's just proximity to that tree is going to have the lightning go out of the tree and then hit you and go to ground. So the thing is to descend, avoid peaks, ridges, cols, tets, and summits. If you see storms rolling in, get away from this as fast as possible. Obviously safely, but you definitely don't want to keep pushing for the col. When you see a thunderstorm coming, you want to turn around and go down immediately. You don't want to pass through it. And again, if you're trying to meet your refuge, is it worth your life? I don't know. It's not the place to be when a storm's rolling in. So you have to get off the ridges and the cols and the tuts and the summits and descend as quickly as you possibly can to make sure you're not the tallest object. Tents provide shelter from rain, but not lightning. And if you're in a tent in the rain, you're still able to be struck by lightning. There's lots of people you'll see, they'll want to pitch their tent at a col, which I did actually myself, because it's great panoramic views, and it's just the allure is there to do it. But if there is a storm, you will be the highest object. Your tent will be the highest object, and your tent will be able to be struck by lightning, which will kill you. There was a Czech family, I think, of 3 who were killed in 2019-20. I don't recall the article. You can look it up on Google. But they were in their tent and during a storm, and their tent got struck and they were killed. The highest death percentages have been in tents for lightning strikes. So keep that in mind. It's fine to camp on your pitcher tent on a summit as long as you have 95% certainty there won't be a storm at night. And if it does come up, then you're if you start to hear a storm coming in, you really should consider breaking camp and doing some night hiking and getting off the col. That would be the way to handle it. Instead of just ignoring it and staying in your tent, you probably should break camp as soon as you hear thunderstorm coming in. If your tent is pitched on a col, and then start to descend at night. There's still a risk doing that, but less than staying on the col. I did do some stealth camping in the valley at night. A storm did come in, and it was a thunderstorm. It was quite an intense one. It was heavy rain, but I was in a situation where my tent was sheltered under trees of similar height, so I wasn't too concerned. I was near a body of water, which was less than ideal, but you have to pitch it somewhere. So you basically have to kind of play the numbers and try and keep your risk down as low as possible, even though it's not going to be zero. Again, avoid bodies of waters, ponds, lakes, rivers. I was near a river that night. And you should be at least 100 meters distance away. I wasn't. I was about maybe 10 meters away. And I was near a river, which is probably less. I think lakes are probably worse. Lakes and ponds, like large flat bodies of water, are probably worse than rivers, but I don't know that for sure. But I don't think rivers are as bad as these, but still in general, bodies of water are to be avoided. Lightning is attracted to the tip. The tall, isolated, pointed objects, make sure that's not you. Whether it's a tall tree or other objects, you don't want to be that object. Ground strikes, these ones here, they jump to metal objects. So if you've got trekking poles, metal backpack frames, cooking pots in your backpack, if it's a ground strike, it's going to want to get into those objects and travel through them, which means it's going to literally attack you or try to pass through you. So you definitely don't want to have these. I do have Vibram sold hiking boots. I don't know how much of an insulative factor that would be to prevent a ground strike. I don't think it's probably enough, but it's better to have that than nothing. But in general, you don't want to have metal objects around you if you're on these types of ground, like exposed ground. Obviously, if it's a field, it's different. But if it's like rock, a rock face, flat rock, or some rock fields, boulder fields, definitely don't have your trekking poles and everything around you in those situations, because it could be a potential conductor for the electricity. Crouching in an exposed area, you hear lots of this. Apparently, it's a bit of a myth. It's only going to marginally reduce your risk. The worst thing to do is probably lie down on ground, apparently, because that increases your surface area to the ground, which makes you a better conductor. So actually standing straight up is better than lying down. And then if you're crouching, it might make you feel good, but it doesn't necessarily reduce your risk. Lightning occurs most frequently before and after a storm, so that's something to consider. A lot of people will say, well, the storm's right overhead, you can hear it, but that's actually not when you're going to get struck by lightning. It's actually before and after the storm passes. So you have what they call a hear-see rule. You have to wait until time between the thunder and the lightning is greater than 30 seconds. So as the storm's coming in, you hear some thunder. Or actually, you're going to see lightning. You see the lightning first. You hear that should be see here rule. You're going to see the lightning first, and then wait for the time it till the thunder, and that tells how far the storm is away from you. Once it gets under 30 seconds, your chance of getting struck by lightning increases, and then as the storm passes, it's in the reverse. So you're going to see it, and then you're going to hear the lightning. And if it's after 30 seconds, it's more safe to travel at that time. So that's quite a bit. If you've got a storm passing through, that could be over several hours before you get these conditions. Otherwise, the chance of getting struck by lightning are quite high. So keep that in mind before and after, not during the storm. It's the before, after, and then it's I got this wrong, but it should be the see here rule. When you see lightning and you hear the thunder, time it. It should be, if it's under 30 seconds, that means as it's approaching, you're in trouble. If it's after 30 seconds, when it's leaving, you're fine. The best thing to do, if at all possible, is to try to seek shelter in a refuge or hut. Most huts won't, they'll let you come in during the storm. There is a website down here called Hiking in Lightning. You can always read that. That's where all this information came from. This was my own rule, so actually I got that reversed, but it didn't come from here. But basically that's what they said, and I just tried to change it into a rule that didn't quite work. So day 3, this is the third day of that I hiked. I actually, I started off at 13, 14K. I got up to 23K. This is the longest day. I did 1,070 meters of ascending and 1,650 meters of descending. There was the short hike I took the day after at 3 kilometers and 310 meters. So I kind of cobbled this together as one day. I went from, this was the day I went from the Col de la Croix de Bonhomme. And then I went back up to the Col de Bonhomme. The map actually isn't correct, because you can then go from Col de Bonhomme up to Col de Four. There's a route through here, a path, but the map maker didn't allow me to do that, so it dropped me down and then took me back up here, which isn't quite correct. So it's simply the map wouldn't let me. But basically you go from Col de la Croix de Bonhomme to Col de Bonhomme, and then you hike up to Col de Four. You came in this way the day before, so you're actually reversing your course and you're going back to Col de Bonhomme. This is the variant 2A. The other way is to continue and then just drop precipitously down into the destination, which was, I think that one's going into La Ville de Glacier eventually. So you can either carry on from Col de la Croix, that's the low route, and this is the high route variant. You can see again the profile that the day took as you're going from here through here. This is the profile of the day. So you climb back up to Col de Bonhomme. Then I took an out and back, so that's the Col de Four. And then I took a out and back to Col des Fours, which is the summit. From the col, you go straight to the summit. The summit looks like this. So there's a big disc there, and it shows you all the different mountains in the different directions, like in a 360 degree. And there's actually snow. This was completely snow covered. It's not covered here in the picture, but this was all snow. This is the first time I walked in snow. That was also the high point at 2756 meters. So you come from the Col des Fours, and you take a variant out and back. So you go up to the Col summit, the Tet summit, and then you come back to the Col des Fours. That's not a straight hike. There's a bit of a rock face to overcome, so you have to actually do a bit of climbing here. Not like technical climbing. You basically have to kind of literally climb over a bit of a couple large slabs of rock. And then once you get to the top of those slabs, you drop back down, and there's more broken slabs, and then eventually you get onto the trail and you go up to the Tet. As we were, I think there was probably about 12 hikers had bunched up here, and they were discussing whether they were going to go to the Tet Nord des Fours or not. I actually started to go there, and then a few other people followed me, because I saw some people coming down. So I thought, well, if they're coming down, that's the way to go. So I basically started to follow them as they were coming down. And I climbed over the initial slabs. It was a little bit tricky, but I got over them, and then I got on the other side. I came down the other bottom slabs and then started to go up the trail. There was, I think, 3 or 4 other people who were behind me, and one of them was a couple. And as they were going through that reverse slab section here, the man had gone quite a far ahead, and the woman was maybe about, I don't know, 15 feet in front of me. And she, I don't think, he was a strong hiker. He wasn't hiking with poles. He was from the region, so he knew these. He knew this stuff like the back of his hand, and he was a strong hiker. He was, this was a day's walk for him. It wasn't a hike. It was a day walk. He was just having fun. And it looked like it was her first time hiking, or at least certainly in the mountains, just like it was for me. But she didn't seem to have too much experience, and she was stepping over some boulders, and her left foot, she put all of her weight on a like, if this is flat ground, your feet are here, and this rock then is tilted this way away from you. She put her foot on the rock that was tilted away from her. So as she stepped on it, her body weight literally rolled her ankle. And so she rolled her ankle right here quite badly. And she was in quite a bit of pain. She didn't break it, and I don't think she sprained it too severely, but she was definitely in pain to walk on it. And she had trail running shoes, whereas I had boots. And again, I think unless you're a strong hiker, experienced hiker, or you're a trail runner, I think everyone should have hiking boots, none of these running shoes. And trail runners, it might make a fashion statement, it might look good, but you definitely should have boots. Her ankle could have been broken there. It was definitely badly sprained, but had she had boots, she probably wouldn't have certainly been impacted as much as she did. And unfortunately for her, she had to hobble her way out all through this distance with this really sore ankle that obviously every time she stopped for a drink or lunch, standing back up on it, of course it swelled up, and then it was sore again, and she literally had to hike the rest of the trail with this damaged ankle. It's hard enough with a good ankle, never mind with a damaged ankle. So that was an incident that probably could have been avoided had she had better gear. And it was just the choice of standing on that ledge and having her body weight literally roll her ankle, because those Vibram, any of those modern hiking boots, they have Vibram, and it grabs quite. You think your foot might slip on the rock, but it actually grips it quite good. And if your body weight's there, it starts to go. You literally roll your ankle. So that was an unfortunate event on that day. It was definitely nice to see the summit up here. This here is where is this taken? Oh, that's in Courmayeur. I'll discuss that a bit later, but let's just continue with this. I went to the Col des Fours. The second highest location on my tour was the Col des Fours, which was here, 2665. Then I did the out and back to the Tête Nord des Fours, so the north summit, or the north peak, and that was 2756 was the high point, which is here. Then I went back to the Col des Fours, and then you go on this extremely steep decline into the refuge Motet. And you can see you're dropping almost 1,000 meters over that distance, and the maximum gradients were 41%. And there were some sections through there that were really challenging. When you have a step and it's a meter or something, which is your leg height, it's not too bad. But when it's more than that, you're literally legs hanging and it's in space, and you can't touch ground. That's the kind of steps that were in this section. There were some really dangerous steps there, really risky, and there's no other way. Like, I tried before I took them. I tried to find another route because I knew it was going to be dangerous, because you're almost jumping, like you're not stepping from one step to the other. You're almost stepping off one step and literally having to drop half a meter before you hit the ground. And, doing that with a full rucksack and on really unstable ground is not my idea of safety. So there's some really steep gradients coming down here. And like I say, the maximum gradient, think about it, 41%. You can see all this stuff that's in red. Whenever it's in red, that means it's steep. If it's darker red, it means it's even more steep. So you can see the steepness in some of these profiles. It's very, very steep coming down, and long and steep, and lots of loose rocks, lots of muddy trails. This was a really nasty section to have to descend, as I recall. Then you get into the Refuge Motet, where I had this is the Refuge Motet, which is right here. And I had a large bowl of pasta, which was really good. I asked for the pasta, and they put this big bowl of these bow tie pastas in front of me, and with some homemade, obviously you're in Italy, and some homemade tomato sauce with some Parmesan cheese. And I kind of looked at her, and I was like, I didn't say anything to her, but I was like, I'm going to eat like a quarter of this. There's no way I'm going to eat this massive bowl of bow tie pizza or pasta. And I think within about 10 minutes, the entire bowl was gone. It was really good pasta, and I ate all of it, which was good because I had to then come out. I was going to try and actually campsite at the refuge, but they didn't permit tents. So I had to continue my hike, and I ended up summiting the Col de la Seigne at 2536. It's quite challenging and steep, as again you can see. What's this maximum gradients at 21%, but it goes on for quite a while, and it does get steep here. It's one of the best views on the trail. And you can see here's some of the views here. This is the Col de la Seigne here, and Seigne, and you can see there's some of the best views in the tour are at that col. Maximum gradient only 21%, and then from there you drop down to the Refugio Elisabetta. So you're going through here down to here. There's a drop. Refugio Elisabetta is probably the second best refugio on the tour, and there's some tremendous views there. They've got a really nice terraced patio. Looked like good food. I didn't really eat anything there. I had a couple drinks, but it looks like it's relatively modern. It looks like it's well laid out. There's this beautiful terraced balcony where you can look at all the mountain rock face views. It's quite spectacular. And I was going to actually try and camp there as well, and again they didn't let no tents there. I don't really know why they do that, but they weren't allowing tents to be pitched near the refuge. I did that at the Col de la Croix de Bonhomme. They didn't have a problem with letting, hikers tent in their field for free, actually. But at Refuge des Mottes, or Refuge Motte and Refugio Elisabetta, they wouldn't permit you to tent. So, by this time it's getting quite late in the day, and I was getting a bit tired, but the show must go on, as they say. So I carried on and dropped. It was probably past 6 o'clock now, and I dropped down. There's a long, steady drop here, and I got into the region of Lac Combal, which probably looks better in the picture, I think, than it is in real life. It might look like this at certain locations, but it wasn't. It wasn't as spectacular as it looks here. It is like that, but not. It depends where you're standing, and where I was standing, I didn't quite get this perception or this view. But that's up in this region here. You can see this Lac Combal. This is in the Val-Veni region, by the way. This becomes the valley, so it's the Val-Veni region where you've been doing lots of rock face climbing up to, not rock face, but rock. You're hiking along the mountain faces for the most of this. As you can see, the drops here are quite steep. You can see all the contour lines here, and to get an idea where it's quite steep and where it's less steep. But this is definitely in the valley region. And then I ended up. There is the trail. It kicks off just before where I ended up staying. It kicks off and it goes up the embankment, and then it carries on to a high point, and then at that high point you have a choice. You can either take the cable car down to Courmayeur, which is what a lot of hikers do, and I had talked to a German hiker on the second day, and we both said to each other that we refuse on principle to take the cable car down. We said, no, we're going to hike down. We don't want to take the cable cars. It was like an agreement between both of us that we would not take the cable cars. We were like, we wanted to be pure hikers and not take cable cars down. So we thought it was kind of like a unethical way to hike. So I was determined not to take the cable car down. I read, however, that the cable cars actually stopped on August 31st. That was the last day they were running. And, of course, it was September 1st or 2nd that day. So they weren't running anyways. And it was late at night. I didn't really know where that hike was going. I would have been hiking at night if I had gone through here. And then if you don't take the second way, if you don't take the cable car down, there's a very precipitously steep drop into Courmayeur that shouldn't be hiked in the rain, according to Cicerone's guidebook. So those were the two things I had to consider. The third option was to continue down the Val-Veni, and there was a campsite that was about 10, called, I think, Camping Hobo. There's 2 or 3 of them. They're all bunched together. And there was a campsite down in the valley. This is off piste though, so I didn't really want to take the low route. I really wanted to do the standard route and not miss it. So I decided I was going to do some stealth camping in the Val-Veni region, which is illegal. But of course it was late. I didn't have anywhere to go, so there's a river running through here, which is quite high flowing, and there was a bit of a like brush, grass, not grass. It was like short trees, but a lot of them, and they had a bit of like a cutout. And I ended up finding some grass there that looked appealing enough, and I pitched my tent really late at night, around 8:30, 9 o'clock. The sun was just about down. And I ended up sleeping there overnight. And this is the situation where around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, when I went to bed that night, I think the clouds were overcast, but it didn't really suggest or threat that a storm was coming in. And around 3 o'clock in the morning, the storm broke. Lots of heavy thunder rolling through, and then of course lightning started to strike, lighting up the entire region. I was close to the river, too close, according to the suggestions not to be close to a water body. But I was tucked into some wooded section, small trees that were all the same height, so I was probably relatively safe there. And I ended up spending the night listening to rainwater hitting my tent, so I didn't get too much sleep. It was quite heavy downpour, and it lasted a long time. Lots of thunder, lots of lightning. It broke. I wouldn't say it broke. I said I tapered off probably around 6:30 in the morning, and I had that little window of opportunity to pack my tent, because I definitely try to avoid packing tents in rain conditions, because it's miserable and your everything gets wet. So I jumped out of my sleeping bag and quickly packed my tent up, and had to strap my tent outside of my rucksack because I couldn't get the poles out, obviously. And it didn't really, I tried to secure it to the rucksack, but I didn't do it. I couldn't really do it. And it was swaying back and forth when I walked, and every 15, 20 minutes I had to stop and tighten it to make sure it didn't fall off and lose it. At that point, I had a decision. The rain started to come back, and there was still thunder. I had a decision whether to go up the original route to the high point and then try and drop into Courmayeur, which was the destination for that day, and basically carry on with the trail. But the decision was that I would be exposed to lightning if I climbed up to the high point, because it was fairly exposed ridge. And then the option to climb down into Courmayeur, which was quite a precipitous drop. Chicharron said not to do it on a wet day. It's difficult on a dry day, and most people take this cable car down because they don't want to hike it, because it is dangerous. And so doing it in the rain was even worse, and the rain was only getting stronger. And with the threat of lightning, the choice at that point became disappointingly clear that I wasn't going to hike that section. It wasn't a section, it was just a sector, a small sector. The section itself actually started in Elizabeth and went to Courmayeur. So by now I had covered about probably 75, 80, probably about 85% of the, I guess 80%. I've probably already covered 80% of that section. So the 20% I was going to have to bypass, sadly, which was really disappointing. I didn't take the cable car though. Anyone who probably went up there, like anyone who was coming from Elizabeth that day and went up to that route, would have had to have, they would have been disappointed the cable cars weren't running, for one thing. They probably would have decided not to hike down to Courmayeur. And what you do, there's a sort of a escape hatch route back to La Vissée, where you can catch a bus. And what I did is I packed my tent, I walked down the road and stopped in La Vissée and actually caught the bus into Courmayeur. That bus had 2 or 3 stops up in this region where the campsites were, and that bus was completely filled with wet, very wet, and soggy hikers. And it then drove into Courmayeur, which is actually a free shuttle bus, by the way. So I got to there, I think I got there around 7:30, and I was in Courmayeur by 8-ish, I think. Maybe those numbers, something like 8:30. I think I hiked about an hour and a half down here, so that would have been like probably maybe 8:39, and then I was in Courmayeur by about 9:30, 10:30 maybe at the latest. And then I secured a hotel when I was in Courmayeur. So a little bit disappointed, to be honest, that I wasn't able to continue with the trail to Courmayeur. But you had 2 things working against you: the threat of lightning, getting up to the high point, and then a precipitous drop. Trying to do that in the heavy rain. The rain only increased in intensity throughout the day. It rained pretty much the entire day, and it was just getting stronger, not weaker. So I think it was the right choice, although it was a regrettable one I didn't really want to make, but I didn't have much other choice. The other thing is that there's supposed to be some spectacular views up at that high point, but when a storm's rolling in, you're not going to see anything. So even if you did get up there, you weren't going to see anything. So that was a little bit disappointing, to be honest. But it is what it is, and you have to accept, like again, weather is going to have a factor on your tour, whether you like it or not. Courmayeur, again, like all the other villages and towns and cities that surround the tour, spectacular. These are the types of buildings that you're seeing, and yeah, it's just you could spend a day there, you could spend 1,000 days, and you'd still be enthralled by the place if you like mountains. I mean, it's stunning backdrop sceneries, and the entire thing is just tremendous. So that was day 3. Overall, a good day. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to stop at Refuge Motet. In hindsight, probably was good that I went, like the hike motto. Because had I waited the next day, it would have been a rain day, and I wouldn't have been able to see what I saw at Col de la Cygne. I wouldn't have been able to see all this. So actually, it kind of turned out, in hindsight, for the better, except for this unfortunate excursion with the bus. Like I said before, I didn't come to take buses. I came to hike. So that was a bit disappointing, but it's only probably about 3-4 kilometers of the hike that I didn't get to do of the normal route. So such is the way it is, unfortunately. Navigation, compass and map. I think you need to have one of those, both, and know how to use it, and also set the declination. Know how to, orientate yourself on the map so that you can use the compass. If you get lost, it's a good, out. It could save your life. Gaia GPS, a must-have. I had it in Courmayeur. I loaded it, but I didn't know quite how to work it, to be honest. I didn't have enough experience with it. And if I go back, I'll definitely have this, fully prepped and primed. There's other GPSs out there, but yeah, definitely have a GPS system with you, because you're going to need it, especially if you're solo hiking. These are necessities for solo hiking navigation. Don't leave without them. They're not nice to haves, they're must haves. Don't rely on this alone. Have a map and a compass with you and know how to use it. It could save your life, literally. Obviously you talk to locals in the campsite, the stores, the restaurants, in the refugios, the refuges, wherever you can on the trail. Asking, where am I? Where did you come? I used to, basically, if I met anyone on the trail, I'd say, well, where have you come from? Where are you going? And then I'd tell them where I came from, where I'm going, and, hopefully where they came from aligns with where you're going. So you know that you're on the right trail. Again, there's sections there. There's maybe 2-3 kilometers where there's no markers. So, it's easy to get lost. You get a lot of crisscrossing on the tour. So you get like, there's the main trail, but there's lots of shortcuts and variants, and it's like crisscrossing all over the place. So it's not always, unless you have like a GPS with you that you can consult. And even then, you have to be careful of over relying on these. Sometimes it's difficult to know exactly where you are or where you're going, and it's always comforting to ask somebody. They'll if they know themselves, don't ever rely on them, because sometimes they don't know either. But in general, it's better to have, if you think you're going the right way and they say you're going the right way, at least that's a bit more comforting than not knowing. Like again, talk to other hikers. The Cicerone guidebook helped me a lot. Trekking the Tour du Mont Blanc, that's this one here. It's very compact, but it's very succinct, and I don't think there were only a couple parts in there where I thought it was not saying what it, like it would say go left and it does actually go right. And it was quite clear that right was the direction, but the book said left. So there's a few points where I thought it was a bit misleading, but in general it was spot on. If you're going to have a guidebook, I think that's a good one to take. It's not too heavy, and I had it in my front pocket all the time and was consulting it. And even a lot of the hikers I was with, they were interested in it. They didn't have it, and some of the information I was basically using that as trade barter system. They'd give me some information, I'd give them some Cicerone. Trail sign markers. You're going to get these trail signs, but again, they're not as, it's not like there's one of these every 100 meters. There may be one every 2 or 3 kilometers or even more spaced out. The other disappointing thing I found was that sometimes these names don't agree with the Cicerone book. And so you come up to this fork in the road and it's got these 3 names, and you know you're going to this name in the Cicerone book, and yet it's not here. So the question is, which one do I take? Do I go left? Do I go right? Because the where I want to go is not here. And to be honest with you, I came across these forks in the road, and I had to guess left or right, and thankfully I guessed the right way. But it's not always clear, unfortunately, exactly where to go. You could probably check your map at that point, but I kind of just, you can see here there's 2 places with a lot more facilities, and this place is less with less. So you could kind of use that it's probably better to go left here than right, but you can't always rely on that. As I said, those will be on the trail when you're going through rock fields or boulder fields. You get these little rock cairns, where people will stack boulders like this to act as a bit of a marker. You will get paintings on rocks as well in the boulder fields, but again, it's all quite sparse. It's quite sparsely populated. They're not like every step you get a marker to tell you where to go. It's more like one here, and then 500 meters or 1,000, like a kilometer later, you might get another one. And how you get from A to B is not always so clear. So, what's happened is people are putting up rock cairns. Good and bad. It's good when there's a few of them, but it seems more and more people are putting them up these days, and so you get like too many of them. And sometimes there's better routes through the boulder fields, so people will say, "Oh, this is the best route," and they'll put their rock cairns up, and then someone else will say, "Oh, I wouldn't go that way, I'll go this way," and they'll put rock cairns up, and suddenly now you got too many rock cairns, and you don't know which path is the best, which one is the one I should take. Probably if you take either one, you'll get there all the same, but maybe you misread it because you take one off of one path and you take another off another path, and there's you weren't supposed to walk between them, but you do. So sometimes there's too many of these, to be honest. But in general, I made it through the rock fields without getting lost. So I think that's it's possible. I didn't have GPS. I didn't have any. There was no one around. Often, I had hiked as a solo hiker. I was experienced periods of 2-3 hours where you didn't see anybody on the trail. Several times. And then, you get bunches of people coming by. Maybe 10 people would suddenly come up in the next 10 minutes. But often, as a solo hiker, you have to be prepared for that. You can't rely on everyone else for navigation all the time. You're going to be in a situation where there could be 3 hours of hiking without, seeing anybody. So you really have to kind of get experienced. I wasn't experienced enough, and I didn't prepare enough. If I go back, I know now what to focus on, but going through it the first time, I wasn't experienced enough and prepared enough to correctly and solo navigate it by myself. I had to rely on other people more than I would have liked to, and then if those people weren't there, I basically had to rely on myself, which I did fine, but I did get lost probably 2 or 3 times. The first time I got lost, the trail was ascending, and then it got to a fork, and the fork on the right was on a rock face, like a polished rock face. Not one you had to climb. I mean, you hiked over it, but there was no markers like dirt markers. And there was no markings to say you go that way. The one marker was like maybe it was really badly marked. The one marker was probably about maybe 100 meters away on a rock. But that was the only between that fork and that marker. There was like 100 meters of nothing. And the other way, which is the route I took, to the left, it did stop ascending. It basically went flat, and then as it had a well-worn path, it looked like the continuation of the tour. Let's put it that way. Much more than the other direction, which I didn't even recognize when I passed it. I didn't know it was a fork there, but there actually was a fork there. So I took the path that looked well worn, and there's actually was a grave marker there for someone from 1878 or something like that. Possibly had died there. And I continued along that path, which was well worn. And then suddenly, before I took that path, there was people ahead of me and there was people behind me, and quite far both directions, like quite far ahead of me. I could still see them. And then I knew people were behind me, probably the exact same distance, equal to me, both ahead and behind. But the people behind me, when I started, so I basically thought, I saw these people ahead. I didn't know how they got to where they were, but I saw them ahead of me. So I thought, well, they must have gone this route, and eventually I'm going to, get to where they are. I could see where they were, but I didn't know how they got there. So I followed this other route, and then this route that I followed, it started off flat. And of course, when you're ascending, you think you're going to continue to go up. I knew I had to go up. And then suddenly it started having steps that started going down. So there was a step, and then it was flat again. Then there's another step, and it was flat again, and another step. And so I was descending more than ascending. So that was the first thing I got concerned about. And the second thing, I knew that the hikers behind me were probably about maybe 10 minutes behind me. And so, this is about 15 minutes into this direction. I seemed to be going away from the hikers that were in front of me. So I was going, I was going east and they were going west. Like they were ahead of me and above me, but they were going west and I was going east. So I thought, well, that's kind of strange unless it hooks around. I seem to be going the opposite direction they're going. So that's the first thing that got me concerned. The other thing is I was descending and I knew I should be ascending. And the third thing is that the hikers who were behind me were about 10 minutes, like 15 minutes later, they weren't anywhere to be seen. So I added those three things up and I said, well, I'm going in the opposite direction of the people in front of me. I'm going down and I've got the people behind me not following where I'm going. Even though I think I'm on the trail, something's not right. And so 15 minutes into the hike, I literally did a U-turn. And then I walked back. And again, when you get stuck like this, don't panic, don't continue, go back to where you started. It sucks to have to walk, 15 minutes back to where you came from, but that's the best policy. And so that's what I did. I walked back to where I came from. And then as I got to that junction, or where I thought that fork was, I looked up and I found the hikers who were behind me were now about five plus minutes ahead of me, and they had followed this section on this rock face, and I didn't know why they went up there, but they were going up there, and it seemed to be right because there was other hikers up there, and I thought, oh, they're going to where the other hikers were. And there's a few sections on the trail that I think are dangerous in terms of risk to health, meaning there's a higher probability you could slip and fall and kill yourself, literally. And this was one of them. You had to cross over a glacier rock, like the water was rolling down, and it was all polished rock. And then you had to step over the water and then immediately go up this really quite jagged and difficult climb to get above it. And it was all very, like if you slipped, there was nothing to stop you. You were going to fall quite far, and you're probably going to definitely get injured badly and possibly die. So it was the less likely part of the trail compared to what I had been walking on, in terms of it visually looking like it was the right location or the right direction. But this really quite difficult path was actually where the trail followed. And I did see this marker that you see here. I saw one of these painted on the rock, but again, it was about 100 meters from where the trail was. So there's a fork. The actual trail was came to a fork, and one of the over this bare rock basically followed up, and the other one was going on a flat dirt trail, which was something like this. It looked quite well worn in, and it was looked like the real trail. Whereas this one looked really risky and dodgy. And then when you got to this part, you had to literally climb over it wasn't this one, but there was rushing water coming down, and then it went right up into a steep rock bank, and the whole thing was really quite challenging to hike through. And again, the danger, it's wet, it's steep enough. There's nothing, like if you start falling, you're just going to keep falling. So anyways, I got through that and then picked up the trail again and then carried on merrily away. But that was one time I got lost. And the other time was when the mist, that short brief period there, where I got lost. And there's another, there's other times, but it was only like a couple missteps, and I realized I was off the trail fairly quickly, and then simply backtracked and got back on course. Like I say, it's nice when there's a well-worn path, dirt trail to follow, but it's not always the case. And then when it is the case, sometimes these crisscross each other several times because there's variants or shortcuts. A lot of people start taking shortcuts because they don't want to go the full route, so they'll cut a shortcut in, and suddenly you got past crisscrossing. So just following these all the time, it's not like there's only one. There can be several of them, but in general, that's usually the way to go, right? Rather, if you have some little, less well-worn side variant, it's probably not the main trail. The main trail is usually the one that's, most of the people are walking through. So that's another indicator. Something I didn't do, and I probably would recommend, especially with using map and compass, is to start to look at the silhouettes of the mountains and start to recognize which ones are which. Just get rid of all the, this part and just look at the silhouette, and then try and, always look for Mont Blanc if you can. Once you find Mont Blanc, then you should be able to say, okay, if Mont Blanc's there, you find it on the map, and then you start to work your way and say, okay, there's this Aiguillette de Midi, blah, 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 and you keep working your way, Grand Jurassic looks like that. And then you can make that out in the profile because you're just doing a circumnavigation, right? It's either going to be it's always going to, if you're doing counterclockwise, this massif is always going to be on your left-hand side. So you want to try to, obviously you're going this direction, then you're coming that direction. Depending, like once you make the turn, you come back this way. So you're going to be seeing this in front and this on the side, depending where you are on the trail. But try to learn to discern the mountains as you're hiking them, and always use that as your navigation. You've got the sun, which is another great navigator, east to west. But also use the mountains and the map and try and keep that as a navigational aid. Just recognize the peaks in the silhouette that they form. When you see this peak like that, in your head you say, oh, there's the Grand Jurassic. When you see this, you go, oh, there's Mont Blanc. So once you know where these are, okay, I must be in somewhere in here. So it's good to know if you can recognize the profiles, the mountains by the profiles, and then you'll be able to situate yourself on the map if you need to use it, and so you know where to navigate away from. You can imagine being on the map, having the map and not knowing not knowing at all where you are. Whereas if you can kind of orientate yourself with the silhouette of the mountains, that may help you try to locate where you are on here. Always keep in mind rivers. Again, locate the rivers rushing through on the map. If you're near a river, try to see if you can locate the river on the map in relationship to the mountain, and that you can use that as a navigational tool. Again, the sun direction, mountain rivers, and then obviously any towns, cities, roads, or buildings that happen to be present. Like there's lots of abandoned buildings too. Like they're not all populated. In the mountains, there's some of them have been abandoned. There's different markings on the trail as well. There's these yellow markers with the TdMB, and there's these red markers here, red and white. I think there's another marker that they use as well. There's several of them that are used to mark the trail, but in general, because they have the main Tour du Mont Blanc, but there's also I think there's one that's called 5A, and it's like this little 3 or 4 day hike, and it's a loop that's kind of a loop within the Tour du Mont Blanc. There's several of these. I think there's 7A and 5A. I'm going by memory, but there's other trails on there, smaller trails that coincide with the Tour du Mont Blanc. So, they use different markings for that as well. Day 4, which was, it was hiking day 4, but actual calendar day 6, because I spent 2 days in Courmayeur. The first day was got there around 10, and it was raining all day, and I had to fix my tent, and I didn't really know what to or how to fix it, and then I spent the next day fixing my tent. And so I actually ended up spending 2 days in Courmayeur. I was only going to spend 1 there, but because of my tent, I had to stay another day. So from Courmayeur, I went to Refugio Bertone, which is the normal route. So you come out of Courmayeur, and then you go up through some villages, and it's relatively steep. I didn't find it that bad. It is steep. You can see it here, but I actually found it a pleasant hike. It's steep, but it's constant steep. It's not like jagged rocks and stuff. There's a bit of that, but in general, I didn't mind that hike. A lot of people said it was really bad, but I didn't mind it. And then you get to the section here. This is the lookout when you get to Refugio Bertone. You get this lookout here, which is quite nice. There's a little standoff away from the trail, and you get to look out. There's a lot of beautiful panoramics there. And from there, we had a helicopter fly in for some reason as well while I was standing there. I don't know why. They didn't rescue anybody, but they flew in on the pad there while I was standing. So I just started the hike away, and a helicopter flew in. It's a bit noisy, to be honest with you. I like it when it's you don't hear things, but unfortunately the helicopter made a lot of noise. And then you have a choice at this location. You can do 2 things. You can go the low route, which is the standard route, or you can do the high route. And I think that hot route goes through one of these cols and then drops back down. So it's just a circle. You can close it whichever way you choose. Taking the high route, it was a sunny day that day, so that would have been a hot, sunny climb, and I just decided to take the low route, which was a nice forest-covered route. It was really quite, not a lot of variant. It was nice and shaded, and it was a really pleasant walk. There wasn't too many people on it. I think more people were taking the high route. And you get to look over the vistas at a higher elevation. Some people I knew said it was spectacular. I'm sure it was, but I enjoyed my low route, to be honest with you. So I didn't do the variant 5A. I simply did the low route and enjoyed it. And there wasn't too much elevation. It was just quite pleasant hike through here. Then you get into Refugio Bonatti. And if you're an alpine hiker, a high alpine hiker, or in general mountain climber, you'll probably know of Walter Bonatti. He's quite famous. In the 1950s, he was climbing, Italian hiker, and he wrote a book in English translated in English called The Mountains of My Life. I've read it twice now. It's a spectacular book. It discusses his early hikes, because he used to hike. He used to hike a lot in the Tour du Mont Blanc Massif. It was an area he loved to go and hike all through these mountains, and you can read about all of his exploits in this book. He also hiked K2, and he was on the team where the Italians climbed and reached the summit for the first time ever, conquered K2, and he was in the team that provided. There was a team of 2, himself and another Sherpa it was a HAP, which is a high altitude porter from Pakistan, who provided oxygen bottles to the 2 other Italians who summited. I think one is Lucidilli, and Campagnoni, I think his name is. Those are the two who actually summited. And there was a lot of controversy, unfortunately, with Bonatti. Read it in the book. It's quite interesting. And unfortunately, they kind of smeared his name and gave him, they kind of attacked him. And I would say without merit. But they decided to, and literally the Italian hiking community or alpine community attacked Bonatti. It was a stupid incident, and it kind of affected him for the rest of his life and his career. But anyways, I think he's a tremendous person, a tremendous alpine climber. He's got some stuff down in Patagonia as well, and obviously a lot in the Massif. He's obviously climbed Mont Blanc several times in the Grand Jurasses, and he also did a couple first ever climbs in this region. One was, I think, called the Red Pillar, and there's several others. And it's just, it's funny because he's got about 20 or 30 climbs in here where he's written about them, and each one of them sounds like a death spiral. His life was on the edge, and he just barely survived, and then the next chapter he's out doing it again. And the same thing, he certainly some of his climbing partners died while he was doing these adventures with them. He lost quite a few friends, but he always survived, and he's a tremendous character. And if you like mountain climbing, high alpine climbing, I strongly recommend the Bonatti book. It's an incredible book. And the Refugio, to be honest with you, does him a very good service. It's I think it's the best Refugio on the tour. It's quite modern. The food is great. You get like big city quality food at big city quality prices. They're affordable. When I say that, I don't mean they're like really high. I mean they're affordable. So it's like, you're getting, as if you were down in the center of Courmayeur, you're getting, in this remote location, you're getting the same food quality and the same prices, which I don't know how they do it, because it's really hard to get food up to these locations. Usually it has to be brought in by a helicopter, which, someone's got to pay for that. But it's just spectacular. I didn't get to stay there. I tried to be honest, because I wanted to just experience it once. But yeah, I'm not going to get a room. So I kind of knew that. I just thought I'd try, but I wasn't going to get a room. So I wasn't able to stay there. But I definitely ate there. I had a great lunch, a nice cappuccino, and they have another terraced patio where you get to look out, and you see this scenery here. This is from the view. You get to look at this panoramic mountain setting as you're having your lunch. It's just it's incredible. It's really something to experience. It's a reward, if you like. You talk about a lot of risks. That's a reward. Having lunch at the Bonatti Refugio and then sitting on the patio and getting to look at these views, it is absolutely tremendous. Definitely one of the highlights of my tour. You then continue out of the Refugio Bonatti. I think I tried to tent there as well, although I don't think I did try to tent there because it was too early in the day. So the intention was to go forward to the Grand Col Ferret. That was the stop point proposed, and so you go down to the Chalet Val Ferret. Some steep gradients in sections, up to 22% gradients, and then you climb out of the Chalet Val Ferret and you go up to the Col Grand Ferret, which is quite steep. Up to 32% gradients. You can see if it's dark red, it means it's steep. If it's light green, it means it's not. So you can see, and it's orange, it's not, it's not as bad as red, but you can see there's some really steep sections in here, and it's quite long. And then you get to this location here, which gives you these spectacular views. And literally 5 minutes off the col, there was a flat section, and I set my tent up that night. And this was around 8:30 at night. And I set my tent up and woke up to this in the morning. There were some strong gust winds came over the col at night, but they didn't last. It was just like one strong puff, and then it just went away. There was no rain. There was no thunderstorms. So I didn't have to worry about lightning. And this was the night where there was three of us, and myself and the other hiker stayed. And the third hiker went forward, and he spent another 10 kilometers or something that night hiking in the night. So again, this was a highlight. I had two highlights that day: the Benati Refugio and then the Grand Col Ferret. Camping overnight there was definitely the best night for myself. It's kind of one of those moments you see in the outdoors or the outside magazine, and so they put those pictures on and they show the tent in the middle of nowhere and this elevation, and there's all these mountains, and it's like, wow, I would like to be there. And it looks fake. It looks like it's there's maybe it's possible but never attainable. That's where I stayed the night. It was in one of those, it's possible but not retainable. That's where I stayed. It was retainable. So for me, it was a huge. It was great. It was absolutely great. One of the highlights of my tour for sure was staying at the Grand Col Ferret. It's over 2,500, so actually we were legal by 37 meters. But I think we got there around 9:30, and then we're gone the next morning at 5:30. Back hiking at 6. So, but tremendous, two big highlights that day. And that's it. We'll pick up the next section